Today's guest is an accomplished force in the world of independent cinema. Thomas Koveleskie is a multi award winning filmmaker, screenwriter, and social media influencer, recognized as one of Hayden's book's top 50 world influencers. As a partner and producer with Quartertown Films, alongside veteran Hollywood producer Douglas Curtis, Thomas is helping to shape the future of feature film storytelling. A graduate of the U.S. Air Force Armed Forces Radio and Television School, he brings over 3 decades of hands on experience across every phase of production, from directing and shooting to editing and producing. With compelling projects like Six Rides to the Promised Land and Newton Knuckles and Wizard of Menlo Park in development, Thomas is a creative powerhouse dedicated to bringing bold, original stories to life. Thomas, welcome to my podcast. Hi, Thomas. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you, and it's good to be here with you.
Yeah. I started this podcast a few months ago, and I invite various experts from various fields to share their knowledge, to share their expertise, to share their journey, mindset, and what kind of struggles they face, and what makes them different from others. So that is the objective of this podcast, Decoding Mastery. So,
I
what
see.
makes you
Okay.
different from others? So, you are a multi-award winning filmmaker and screenwriter, and you are social media influencer. You are listed in Hayden's books, World Top 50 Influencers. Wow, that's superb. And you are a partner and producer at Quartertown Films.
Correct.
That's great. So, what what drew you to filmmaking? From where it all started, Thomas?
Where did I start?
Yeah.
Well,
What happened?
I
Yeah.
started a long time ago. I was actually in the United States Air Force,
Okay.
and I worked in a television studio,
Okay.
and that's how I got my start in a television studio. We did studio production and also technical repair of studio equipment and maintenance, along with the productions. And I found it very interesting. And prior to that, when I was 10 years old, I wrote my first book. And I had a love for writing, and also filmmaking fascinated me at the same time. I just didn't know where the two of them were going to head eventually. So once I joined the Air Force and I got exposed to cameras and filming, I really liked it. And but it was prohibitively expensive back then to buy cameras and production equipment, and only the lucky few got to work on productions, probably in Hollywood, or maybe another TV studio or something like that. So once I got out of the Air Force and technology started catching up and prices started coming down on technology, I bought my first video camera, and I started making little videos like MTV style videos and music videos, and people took notice of them, and I started getting some local jobs doing corporate recordings and meetings and things like that. And From there, I built my way up. But that's how I started anyway. That's the very bottom of where I started making my move up.
What was your first project that you remember?
I'm
First
sorry,
project. First project that you remember.
uh the first project that had some substance to it on my own was a music video that I shot, using all local people, and this was in the 1990s, uh,
Okay.
and the video came out surprisingly well. And we showed it around to different people. And we had a little, a screening on it, and the people that were involved. And it was just a neat little thing. But it it got me started with my equipment, and the editing process and the whole production process. It was a small project, but yet it was a very good learning experience for me. And this was around 1990. I'm going to say somewhere around 1993, probably. And it was a very good learning situation for me outside of the studio, on my own with my own equipment, and that was before computers, before we had computer editing. So it was we used linear tape recording, and it was a whole different process than it is now. Believe me. So that was my first project, and I can't remember the name of the song. It was a popular little song that was played on MTV and on the radio. And I enlisted my little sister and some of her friends, and we made this neat little video. And that's really how it all started.
That's great, Thomas. That's great. So you had a formal education in U.S. Air Force, Armed School, Radio and Television School. So how did it help you in shaping your career?
Um, when I went to school, I not only learned the production side of the television world, but we also learned the technical side on how to maintain the equipment and even fix it. Uh, and so I was exposed to both. I was exposed to the technical side and on a user end from a production standpoint. So I had the best of those both worlds. Not only did I understand how to use the equipment, I understand how it operated and the limitations, and and the proper usage and setup and things like that. So when I got into independent filmmaking, I also was able to understand the technology of cameras and discern between good equipment, bad equipment, and cut to the chase of what to use, not only for production but also for the best technical aspects. And that goes into like post production, how to edit and things like that. So my education was very important, because it set me up for the future, and what I was going to do. So
So
it was it was a very
before that school you were already involved in filmmaking, a sort of filmmaking, doing your own stuff, and that school helped you in technical side of the filmmaking.
Yes, yes. I
Yes.
think that not too many filmmakers understand the technical side of things.
Okay.
Some of your cinematographers, and maybe some crew people might understand certain things, maybe with audio capture or something like that. But when I meet with a production team, I understand the technology of the cameras, of the computers, and all that goes into it, not just on a user end, but more under the hood, so to speak, that I understand, electronic wise and technical wise, how the equipment works and limitations, and that's an advantage because you stay out of trouble,
Yeah.
using the equipment. You can keep yourself from making some serious mistakes. Sometimes can be very costly. Yeah.
Yes, that helps you a lot in saving those costs in later times, that you
Sure.
can
Yeah.
learn there. And you can learn from perspective from all the aspects of filmmaking. So
Yes. And that's another, you bring up a good point there. A lot of people tend to gravitate and concentrate on one area of filmmaking. And
right,
that's sort of how the Hollywood structure is, that people come in, where they work on audio or they work on scene art, production art, artists, or camera crew. when you do an independent production, as the head of an independent production, and the way that I came up, the grassroots way, learning everything on my own, after my Air Force education, it was I call it the University of Hard Knocks. You buy the equipment and you learn how to use it, and you do all aspects of filmmaking. You do everything. You wear all the hats.
Yes,
You're the director, you're the producer, you're the production team, you're the lighting person, you're the sound person, and you might bring in other people with you, but you have to know all the different aspects of filmmaking to do it properly. And you have to keep switching the hats when you do it. And I think that makes the most complete filmmaker is someone that understands all the aspects that go into filmmaking. The more you know, the further you'll go. It's If you can learn everybody's job and know it well, you can also keep yourself out of trouble because you will then become sort of the go-to guy so that people can depend on your guidance and your knowledge and your experience. And that's what you have to offer. Not only can you do their job, but you can do everybody else's job. And I feel that's really important because if you see something that's not quite right, you're able to pick it out in time so that it doesn't slow you down or it's not a costly mistake. So, and in my estimation, anyway, without sounding cruel, I think that the best filmmakers are people that started small and they learned all the aspects, all the different facets of filmmaking, including editing. And they always say to become a better filmmaker, become an editor. Edit your own stuff. This is, edit your own material because that is a teaching experience in itself. And that's what I tell, people getting into business. Go shoot something. I don't care if it's on your iPhone or whatever it is, and then edit it. And then you'll learn your mistakes. You will become a better filmmaker and cinematographer by editing your own material because all the mistakes are very glaring right in front of you. So that's how I learn, by making mistakes and correcting them and saying, I'll never do that again. So I think
a
that to
great
be
way
a
of learning.
rounded, yeah. So to be
That's
a
a great
rounded filmmaker, I think you need to cover all the bases.
cover all the bases and all fundamentals. Yes, perfectly true. So, Thomas, you have worked in all aspects of this production. So, which role do you enjoy the most?
What aspects of production?
Yeah, you have worked in all aspects of production. So, which role do you enjoy the most?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think that I love shooting. I love to be a cinematographer. I love to capture. And I love to use different lenses and think of different shots and composition. Um, I think that was my first love, was just using a camera and being a cinematographer. But of course, as I said, I had to do everything else. I also like editing quite a bit in post production. I actually recently, within the past less than 2 years, I won an award for editing for a documentary that was filmed here in Philadelphia. I won for best editor of a short historical documentary from the Las Vegas International Film Festival. So I'd like to think that I'm pretty proficient, with editing. And I really like to sit down because it's where the show is put together. It's where all the magic happens, when you put the show together.
Yeah,
Because it takes a lot of work to get to that point. I also love writing. And, I think that's obvious with I entered my latest project in quite a few international film festivals, over 20, and the script that I wrote, we can talk about that then. It won every film festival that it was entered into, which was a big surprise. So to answer your question, I love writing and I love editing and I love shooting. Those are probably my favorites.
Writing, editing, and shooting. Wow, superb.
Right.
So, Thomas, are there any filmmakers who have had a huge influence on your work?
Yes, there are several. Before I got heavily involved at the independent film level, and I was trying to work my way up, I was more of a mercenary. I was hiring myself out to all different people for different video type work, and I think a lot of people start that way. But even at that time, I was kind of a fan of artsy film, like uh, David Lynch, for instance, who does a lot of
Yes,
weird things, and he did the series that might be known around the world called Twin Peaks, and he did a lot of crazy movies. Mulholland
seven.
Drive was one of them,
I think
and I
seven
thought
movies.
that his technique and the way he made these weird movies was just really cool. And so I would say that he had kind of an influence on me, but it's not where it ended up. And I'll explain that in a second. Actually, another person that had a big influence on me, and it's kind of who I am today, is Rob Reiner,
Okay.
who does a lot of character study type films that evolve around everyday people and life and circumstances and things like that. I would say that he is who I modeled myself after, or I would say that my way of approaching writing and what I like to write about is like Rob Reiner. But there's still that David Lynch in me sometime that would love to do some kind of weird project, you know? Then once I started getting involved in independent film, I was really fortunate. I started going to film festivals. I went to markets. I went to, for instance, like the American Film Market in Santa Monica, California, which is a very big film market where filmmakers and film distributors and sales agents and customers from around the world, they all go there to buy films and to network and to meet people and get productions launched and things like that. I was sitting in a restaurant bar just having some lunch, and there was a gentleman sitting next to me, and we just started talking, and he was very friendly, and we started having a conversation that led to dogs. And in back of me, I have two sleeping dogs. I have two greyhounds, and this is important to the story because I told I told this gentleman sitting next to me, his name was Doug, and I said, "Yeah, I have two dogs," and he had a couple of dogs, and we started talking about dog stories and stuff, and we just hit it off. And he introduced himself, and his name was Doug Curtis. And Doug Curtis just happens to be kind of a kind of an icon and a bit of a legend in Hollywood. He's been in Hollywood since 1976, and his first film that he came out with was a horror movie that didn't really go many places. But his second film was a film is a cult classic called The Philadelphia Experiment, and it's a sci-fi picture, and that came out in the 1980s, and it starred Karen Allen, who was the main actress, and I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name, the actor that was with her. I'll think of it. Um, but it was a story about a science fiction story about the ship that disappeared in the harbor when they magnetized it, and it was a very good story, and it's a cult classic here in the United States. Well, Doug did that movie. I found out later. So he asked me what I was doing, and I told him that I was working on some film projects and I was a writer. And he asked me to send him what I was writing. And I said, sure. And when I went, when I found out who he was, I was like, oh boy, he's been around. He had done like 40 some films. So long story short, when I got back to Pennsylvania, where I live, we talked on the phone, continued the conversation. I sent him my writings, and he called me about a week later, and he said, "I love what you write." He said, "It's really good." I said, "Wow, I mean, thank you." And from there, it was a friendship. And then he said, "You're really," he said, "what you write is really good. It's from the heart. I like it, you know." And he said to me, "How would you like to be my partner?" And I said, "Okay." And so that was back in about 2014, I guess. And we we connected first with dogs, and then we came together and we decided to develop a slate of films to get into production. In the meantime, I was helping him do budgets, film budgets, because he is one of the premier. He's retired now. He just retired. Doug Curtis just retired. He was one of the premier line producers in Hollywood, meaning you budget a film and you put all the dollar values in a line item budget. And he was very, very good because that's very important that you get a correct budget.
Yeah.
Uh, and he had the distinction in Hollywood of making 40 some productions, and not one of them went over cost, and not one of them went over schedule. So he was
Okay.
on the dollar and he was on the time. And he taught me that. So Doug Curtis became my mentor. He doesn't like me to say that because he said, "You're my partner. I'm not your mentor. You know, you're not my student." And I taught him a little bit about low budget filmmaking because I had a lot of it under my belt that I didn't talk about yet, and working in Europe. And he understood high budget filmmaking. And we met in the center and we became very good friends. And we still talk to this day. In fact, I'll probably talk to him today sometime. We talk once a week now that he's retired. And he taught me a lot. And he was not only my friend, but he was my um, he was my wind. He kept me moving, you know, and he was my catalyst to keep me going. And he was always positive and nurturing me and helping me. And he's the biggest influence in independent filmmaking in my life because my connection with him and my partnership with him um, not only gave me great knowledge, but it also gave me great credibility.
That's
That when
great.
people say, "Oh, you know, Thomas Koveleskie, oh, he's a protege, he's a Doug Curtis protege," and I'll happily take that because yes, I am a protege of Doug Curtis, and he gave me a lot of knowledge. And we worked together on different projects for almost 10 years. And as I said, we're lifelong friends now, and
That's
you
great,
know we
Thomas.
keep.
You are very fortunate to having a amazing partner as well as mentor. So it's very you're fortunate. Very few people
Yes,
have such kind of advantage, such kind of opportunity.
exactly.
Yeah.
It really gave me a boost. It really
Yes.
did. It really helped my career and to where I'm heading and given me the confidence and the credibility because you know, when you start, you're unsure of yourself. Like, who
Right.
am I? I'm trying to break into Hollywood or I'm trying to do this, you know, but it all comes with experience. And when you start with nothing, like I did, you gain confidence, but you still have that doubt. I
Right.
think we all have that self doubt, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
and Doug, you know, Doug Curtis, he brought the confidence out in me, and that's what he always did.
Yes.
Never, you know, he was always nurturing and pushing me in the right direction. And he said to me, "Why didn't we meet 20 years ago?" He said, "You and I would be big in Hollywood together right now." And I said, "Because I wasn't ready 20 years ago." You know, I said. So
That's
anyway,
so
so yes,
amazing.
he was, yeah. So
So,
it's a great story.
yeah, yeah, it's a really great story that you had an amazing partner. So, Thomas, when you started your company, independent filmmaking company, what kind of struggle challenges you faced in your initial years,
Well, when I
especially in
first
Los Angeles,
started,
in Hollywood? What kind of challenges you faced?
well, before that, I changed. I had more challenges before I got into independent filmmaking. I worked for a lot of how I got a lot of experience that I brought to the table when I met Doug Curtis was I shot a lot of low budget projects, everything from documentaries, travel films, late night stuff that I call schlock on for cable and satellite in Europe and Canada, and anything that would pay me. I did work for the Catholic Church in Philadelphia. I produced videos for them. I
Okay.
did a few local commercials. I would do anything. So that gave me a lot of experience. And I was really confident in my production experience. Where
Okay.
I needed to come up was in my screenwriting process, and I had to really dig into that later. And that was one of the challenges too. So I took all this experience that I had with my lower level, low budget stuff. Like the biggest production I had done was about $250,000, which is tiny compared to, let's say, Doug's $50 million budget. He did on a movie. Like Freddy versus Jason, he did, which was one of the biggest horror movies of its time when Freddy versus
Okay.
Jason came out. And so it was a big difference there. So when I eventually moved up and I said, I want to move into independent film, I want to get out of this lower level stuff and I want to get independent film and I want to tell my stories. It was hard breaking into it because I didn't know a soul.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to network. And this is probably the biggest thing, how to network and how to make acquaintances and connections and relationships and start building relationships. And even to get to the American film market, to meet Doug Curtis, to get to that point was a big process. And
Yeah.
learning about these things. Oh, there's American film market, and I can go there and I can meet other filmmakers and talk to different people, sales agents and distributors who can tell me what kind of material that the market wants, that the market needs. And that's all like reconnaissance, and you're doing your homework. So I had to learn even to get there, how to get there and what to do and how to present yourself. So everything was a big hurdle moving up, and it was difficult because it's all about relationships in this business. Unless you are born, you know, with a big last name, coming from a lot of money, where somebody hands you the money and says, "Here, go make your film." That's rare. You have to fight, and you have to really, um, scratch and claw, if you will, to get where you need to go. And this kind of sums this up when you talk about some of the difficulties. And I don't want to scare anybody away, but you have to be prepared for the long haul. And you don't want to get too high, you don't want to get too low, because you are going to have those peaks and valleys in this business. Believe me, and it is a business. I'm a creative, but I understand that there's creativity and there's also business side. So Doug Curtis said his advice to young people trying to break in, and this is his quote. It's not a nice one, but he says, "You have to be willing to die for it." And that's what he told me.
Okay.
And what he means by that is you have to give it not
Everything.
100%. You have to give it 110% or more,
You have to give
and
everything for this.
and get yourself out there.
Yeah.
And so that's what I decided to do. That just give it that 110%. And I wrote my first script, and that's the one that I showed to. It wasn't the first script that I wrote, but it was one for my independent projects, and that's the one I showed to Doug Curtis, and he liked it. I showed him other scripts, and he was thrilled with them, and that gave me a level of confidence too, knowing that I could compete at this level, you know, and Doug said to me, "There's another saying that 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 Doug used to say to me all the time. He'd say to me, 'Hey partner,' he said, 'don't you never worry about what you don't know, because we all don't know everything. He say, partner, we know what we know, and what we don't know, we learn in a hurry. And that's what it's like as an independent filmmaker is if you don't know something, you learn it in a hurry, out of necessity, you know. And you know what they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Well, it's the same way
Right.
with filmmaking. So Doug taught me to be even and to go with the flow. Don't get too high, don't get too low, and be in it for the long haul. And the most difficult thing is breaking in and making those connections and making those relationships. And
Mm.
you have to network all the time. And then along with that is also finding money, finding
Right.
production money and people that will believe in your projects and your ability because they're not only investing in your project, but a lot of these people feel like they're investing in you as well. So you have to have a good team. If you're a little bit inexperienced, you better have a very good team around you that has more experience than you. If you know what I mean, you build a team for a project, and because it's a team effort, and you always want to surround yourself with people that are as good or better than you. And another thing is when you get in this business, there's a saying, you know, uh, park your ego at the door, because that's what you have to do. And because that's also a hurdle is you don't put an ego out there because you're going to
Yeah.
get shot down so many times and you're going to knock on so many doors and the doors are going to close. They're not going to open. So you have to
Yes.
be ready for that. And that's difficult. And maybe that's not the answer that you wanted, but that's the start of it. And then, sure, other difficulties are making a production. It's an actor said to me one time, Tom, he said filmmaking. He said it's like waging a war, isn't it? And I said, you know what? I said you're right. And it's like waging a war. It's like planning a battle. You have so many moving pieces, and some of these pieces move within themselves, and all these departments. It's very difficult. So you really have to be on top of things. And somebody as experienced as Doug Curtis said to me, Tom, there's something that you have to do. He said, and you have to drill it in your brain, and it's called pre-production, planning.
Okay.
Pre-production is planning for a film. Pre-production is everything. He said, if I don't do enough pre-production to where I feel like I'm completely ready, he said, I go on set, he said, and I have a panic attack. That's what he told me. And that's coming from a Hollywood icon. And if he doesn't feel prepared, he's not confident. And he said he'll have a panic attack because it's so overwhelming. So you have to really be prepared, and it's very difficult. Especially as from a producer standpoint, because you're basically the captain of the ship. They always say, "Oh, the director's the captain of the ship." Yeah, they are. And as far as the talent and making the film, what have you. And I also do direction too. But the producers are really the captains of the ship. They are the ones that are running the set every day and they're overseeing every department that there is. And producing is the hardest job in filmmaking, bar none. It is absolutely the hardest because
Got
you
it.
not only have to know your job again, you should know everybody else's job to be
Right.
really effective at it. So that's those are the hardest things for me that I've encountered so far. Yeah.
Great learnings, Thomas. Great learnings. So you had an amazing career and learned so many things. Wow. So what inspired you to write the screenplay for this Six Rides to the Promised Land? I think it was a
Um,
huge hit.
actually, it's based on. Let me back up a little bit. I mentioned Rob Reiner earlier, and Rob Reiner is the type of guy that writes on life experiences. And there's an expression in the screenwriting world, which is a whole little world itself that you try to master, you know, and it's difficult. writing a screenplay. It's more difficult than it looks. Rob Reiner always wrote on the absurdities of life or things that he came in contact with. And there's an expression that says to a beginning screenwriter, write what you know. Okay? Because when you write a screenplay, you basically, I don't mean this in a blasphemous way or hurt anybody's sensibilities or anything, but you have to be a god, or you have to be this, this omnipotent person that knows everything in this story. You know every character, who that character is, everything about him, his backstory, and you have to bring all these characters together. So you have to know all these characters and tell it in a cohesive story. And so you have to be an expert. You have to be a subject expert. And those are the people that tend to write the best scripts because they know the nuances of a particular, subject or a particular theme or concept, So when I started, I knew I had some stories, my life experience. I write on my life experiences. And then what I
Okay.
do is I tend to embellish them. I take my life stories. In some cases, they don't need embellishment, but I embellish what I write. And I write on my life experiences. And I've had some crazy experiences in my life. I don't know if we all are like this, but not everyone has a story that's good for the screen. And that's the first thing. You have to make sure, everybody has a weird Uncle Joe or something like that, but is it really worth a story that everyone's going to be interested in, So I write based on ideas that I gather from my life experience. And that's how I approach it as a subject expert. And Six Rides to the Promised Land was a story. It takes place in 1976 during the bicentennial summer of the United States when we were 200 years old. And there was a huge celebration in America.
Okay.
And I was a youngster then. I'm giving my age away. But I wrote about a time me and two friends, we wanted to escape a small town in Pennsylvania. And we always saw on television Hollywood and California and the sunshine and the beaches and the girls and the parties and things like that, that you're attracted to when you're a teenager, We hitchhiked. I don't know how you say, you put your thumb up on the side of the road
Yeah.
to catch a ride.
Yeah. Right.
And we call that hitchhiking here in the United States. And we call it thumbing because you put your thumb up,
Yeah.
So we thumbed our way. We had a sleeping bag and a couple changes of clothes on our sleeping bag strung across our back. And we thumbed our way from Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, all the way across country to Los Angeles. That's how we got there, thumbing a ride. And it was a crazy cross-country adventure where we met some of the zaniest people that you can't make up. Like I say, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Well, in this case, it was. And it became obvious to me at some point that this had to be a screenplay. And I turned it into a screenplay. And that's how it came to be. It's based on a true story with some
That's
embellishment. And there's not many stories out there about the American bicentennial summer of 1976. And that's why we believe that it has also high hopes. That's a project that we're on the side that we're working on also. I talked with one of the most prolific casting directors out of New York City. I won't name drop, but she told me that when she read it, she really liked it. And she said, I've been doing this business for a long, long time. She said, and I have never seen a screenplay come across my desk that dealt with this subject and the American Bicentennial of 1976. It was a very, very iconic summer in America at that time.
Okay.
You know, America was one big barbecue and happy party, over the summertime. And she believes that it also has a great commercial appeal to it. So that's how it started. And the current project that I'm working on, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. Maybe you want to ask me that, but we can
Yeah, I
talk about
think,
it.
yeah, that was my question, that what the story behind Newton, Knuckles, and the Wizard of Menlo Park? I think you
Okay,
are mentioning the same thing, no? Yes.
absolutely. Yeah, this has quite a story behind it. That is a working title, by the way. Newton, Knuckles, and the Wizard of Menlo Park is the working title, and we're going to change that, shorten it. And we're not quite sure yet. The movie may end up being called The Diggers, and I'll explain that.
Okay.
How this story came about is this: Newton and Knuckles is a boy and a girl that are classmates in a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania. I lived in this small coal mining town growing up in Pennsylvania. And the Wizard of Menlo Park is Thomas Edison, the inventor,
Okay.
who invented the light bulb,
Yeah, yeah.
amongst
Right, right.
many things. In this small town of Shamokin, Pennsylvania, now this is true, historic fact.
Okay.
Thomas Edison in 1882 went to this small, growing coal town um, based on anthracite coal mining. They discovered anthracite coal and they called it black gold because they realized how important coal was. It fired our factories, it heated our homes, it was
Yeah,
everything.
right.
So this town called Shamokin, which is an Indian word, an American Indian word, built up around this coal mining industry. And it's still there today, not in great shape, quite honestly, but it was a thriving, self-contained town. It was when you talk about, if you've ever heard of, they say America is a melting pot of
Yeah,
different people and ethnicities and
right.
nationalities from around the world. Shamokin was like the original experiment
Okay.
of this melting pot because people came from all over the world to work as immigrants in the coal mining industry. They
Okay.
came from Europe, they came from India, they came from Russia,
Yeah.
they came from the Caucasus, um, uh, um, uh, all mostly Asia and Europe that they came from. And they all came there to work in the industry, to work in the coal mining industry. So you had all these different sections around the town of all these different immigrant populations, and they had factories, they had dairies, they had markets. And Thomas Edison found out about this unique town and he was very curious about it. So he came to visit, and he came to visit some businessmen that were there. And he made a proposal to them. He said, "How would you like to have electric lights in your town?" And they said, "Oh, we don't know. We don't know anything about electric lights." This was 1882. No electric lights were around at that point. So what he did, Thomas Edison, um, he built a power plant in one area, and he had a laboratory about 2 or 3 blocks away. And Thomas Edison wanted to prove to the world that his electric lights were safe. And that was the big thing, that they were safe, number one, because people knew about electricity and how bad it could be.
Right.
And he also wanted to prove how useful it could be on everyday life. So what he did, one of the businessmen, his name was William McConnell, and he's in this story. William McConnell had him put electric lights, the first electric light that was in a house in the world history was in the McConnell Mansion on Sunbury Street in Shamokin, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Thomas Edison built a power plant to power one light bulb, and he ran the wires up to William McConnell's wife. Her name was Kitty McConnell, and she liked to bake at night, and she had to bake under candlelight. He put electric lights in her kitchen so that she
Okay.
could bake at night. And this is a true story. This is history.
Yeah. It's so
And
interesting.
that's the history of the light bulb. The very first light bulb
Yeah.
in
Many
a
people
house.
are not aware of this history. They know just he invented light bulb, but they are not aware of this history. So it's so
Yes,
interesting.
it's a very known obscure
Yeah.
fact. And so and this house, the McConnell mansion, it was abandoned when I was a child by then, and it was
Okay.
a haunted. Everyone said it was haunted,
Okay.
and it was very scary because this was back in 1882 when he brought the electric light. So he lit up Aunt Kitty's kitchen, and everybody was like amazed. And she baked all night long, all through the night. And he said, now he said, let's put a light in a church in town. So there was a church, there was a Catholic church called St. Edward's Catholic School and Church. That's where I went for a while when I lived there. I went to the St. And our church, Thomas Edison put the first light in the church in the world.
Okay.
So that was the big story. So I was exposed to that. And then hold that thought for a second. With that history being there in the town, it was amazing. There was a legend called the Money Cave. Supposedly, one of these rich barons, coal barons, he didn't have any heirs or kin left, and he hid his money before he passed away. He hid it somewhere, buried it. He did
Okay.
something to it. And all he said was, whoever is clever enough to find my wealth, it's yours. It's legally yours. So everybody was traveling around, including me as a kid, trying to find this money, this treasure. We were
Okay.
always in search of this treasure, the money cave treasure.
Okay.
And when I realized that I had a couple different stories here, we had the Edison connection, which is history, and we had this legend of the buried treasure. And I was like a treasure hunter when I was a kid. We were, even before Indiana Jones, we were Indiana kids, we're
Yeah.
hunting for treasure all the
Right.
time. And that was our adventure. We'd go to the Saturday matinee at the movie theater and see
Okay.
some adventure on the screen. And then we'd go out hiking and trying to
Yeah.
find treasure. So I took these two stories, the Thomas Edison historical facts and the legend of the buried treasure, and I combined them into a
Oh,
story. And
superb.
that's how Newton Knuckles and the Wizard of Menlo Park was born.
Wow. Yeah.
And the story is about this archaeological agency made up of sixth graders. They're like 12, 13 years old. They call themselves the Diggers.
Yeah.
And the diggers go around to all these old houses and abandoned places looking for treasure and different artifacts and things like that. And it started getting pretty boring. And one day, a fellow that worked at a railroad crossing, stopping cars for the trains to go by, they had them, they were, the railroad crossing guards. He told them about the legend of this buried treasure. So the diggers, they all perked up and they said, wow, so there's buried treasure here. And he said, yes. He said, and old man McConnell said, whoever is clever enough to find it can have it. So they decided to go out on this treasure hunt to find this treasure. Well, in the meantime, when they started their treasure hunt, they learned that the coal mining industry was starting to go downhill. And that's kind of true. And the town was going to be in trouble financially. So the kids thought if they could find the treasure, they could enrich themselves. They wanted to buy bikes and chocolate cakes and hot dogs and all that kind of stuff. And but they also thought they could help save the town if they could find the treasure, because they thought that money could be invested into the town to help the coal mining industry. So that's the premise of the story.
Oh,
And now where Thomas Edison comes in is this. All the clues, there's 6 or 7 major clues that the kids have to, the Diggers Archaeology Agency, have to uncover. They have to unravel clues. They're complex clues. And all the clues are based on Thomas Edison's life, story, and his inventions. So the children have to learn or know about Thomas Edison, his life, and his inventions in order to solve these clues all around the area. And that's how they start. And they start by going to City Hall and looking at William McConnell, who left the treasure behind, at his last will and testament. And in that last will and testament, there was a clue, and they stumbled upon the clue, and that was the basically the inciting moment where the story then takes them to hunt for the treasure. And it's a really fun story. It's a throwback to like the 1980s. And I probably shouldn't say this, it might be blasphemy, but the person that did the artwork for our cover, his name is Howard Perlin. He did the original artwork for our advertising, and he was a artist for Marvel Comics. Him and his father, they actually did the artwork for Marvel Comics, and he read the script before he did the poster for us. He hand drew it like a comic, uh, and he said, "I want to get an idea of the story." So he read the story, and he said to me, "Tom," he said, "I got to be honest with you." He said, "This story feels Spielbergish,
that's so
meaning that
interesting. Yes.
it had elements that reminded him of an older Spielberg story." And then I knew maybe we have something. And so he said, "Yeah," he said, "I think you have something here." So it's a throwback. It's a throwback to these old matinee movies that I saw as a child, these adventures and stories that your whole family can go together to see. It's a
Yes.
very wholesome, fun, high spirit kind of movie that the
Yeah.
whole family can enjoy. And
Yeah.
so that's what Newton Knuckles and the Wizard of Menlo Park is, kind of in a nutshell. That's a longer story.
That's so
but
interesting, Thomas. Yeah, I'm simply hooked. The story is so interesting. And what you said that you picked two ideas, different ideas, and then you connected it. So
yes,
there was a great advertising copywriter, American copywriter, Eugene Schwartz. He wrote an excellent book, Breakthrough Advertising. He used to say that creativity is nothing but connectivity. So you are connecting
yes,
different ideas and you are producing a new idea. So that is what it.
exactly. and and
So,
that and that's what makes it original. Um,
right.
you know, somebody, a very high up person that read the script. I will do some name dropping here. His name is Mark Foligno, and
Oh,
Mark Foligno was one of the executive producers of the Academy Award winning picture called The King's Speech.
hmm,
Uh, and we tried to get him involved. He lives in London. He has a company in the UK in London, and he was too busy to get involved because he had about 50 projects on his plate. But because one of our producers that was on our team knew him, and he did us a favor. He said, "I'm interested in this." He said, "It looks interesting. I want to do what's called script coverage." He said, "I will do script coverage for you." And it's basically an analysis about the story and the characters and the development and the originality and things like that. And they call it script coverage. And so he just said, "Will that help you?" He said, "And I'll give you a report." And so him and his assistant, they went over the script, and they actually did the script analysis for us, which is a huge task. And they did it for free as a favor to us. And when he got done with the story, he said, "This has to get made. This has to get into production," he said. And this is coming from an Academy Award winning producer.
yeah,
He said, he said, "This is really original." And he said, "I'm going to tell you he said, what I got out of this. And here's, it's called an elevator pitch. He said, Newton Knuckles and the Wizard of Menlo Park, simply, he said, is the Goonies meets the Da Vinci Code.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And that
Right.
sums it up.
Yeah.
Now, The Goonies is a spectacular cult film from Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
And our film, we do not borrow anything
Yeah.
from The Goonies,
Yeah.
except that these kids are in a small town like the Goonies, and
Yeah.
there's a group of them like the
Right.
Goonies.
Right.
That's it. That's
Right.
where the similarities end. There
Yeah.
is no similarity that we borrowed, you know,
Yeah.
from the Goonies. But he said it had that kind of appeal to him with the Goonies. And he said it also, he said the complex clues based on Thomas Edison, he said kind of reminded him of like kids with the Da Vinci Code, because there's word puzzles and different things that they have to unravel. It's a very intelligent kind of treasure hunt movie. And he said that not only did he highly recommend it, he said, but it has to get made. And he would help us get some contacts with distribution and things with streamers, like Hulu and Netflix and things like that. So that was also when we talked about connections before. This was a super important piece of the puzzle here to have a script analysis from a fellow like Mark Foligno that highly recommended this
Right.
because I give this to people and say this is what you know the script analysis is from this
Yeah.
really influential person, in the film industry. So it was all about when you talk about connectivity, oh my goodness. And that's why I was saying earlier, it's all about networking. This person knows that person. I know this person. And you bring all these to the table. And
Right.
so
Right.
and that's how this project came together. People that really believed in it and that helped me and believed in me. I'm so blessed in that regard. So this film is the one that we're working on right now.
Okay.
Um, at the moment, we have Catherine Hardwick, who was the director of a movie you might have heard of called Twilight. That was a
Yeah.
big movie,
Very big
and
movie.
also uh, she also did Little Red Riding Hood, and she also did a kind of a cult classic film called 13, which was, I believe, kind of her directorial debut. But Catherine Hardwick is attached right now as our director,
Okay.
uh, which gives us a great amount of credibility. I spent over a week with her last summer scouting locations for this project, and to have someone of Catherine's um, loftiness and level within the industry, and she's very clever. She's a very clever director, and she understands children. And she directed children with her movie 13, and Little Red Riding Hood is another one. And she was a logical fit, and it was through connections again that we were able to land her to bring her on board.
Okay.
Her and her husband Jamie Marshall, who is the son of Alan Marshall, who is an iconic producer in the UK.
Okay.
They both read the story and they really liked the kids, the concept, and the story. And next thing we know, I'm finding myself on location, scouting locations with the Catherine Hardwick and her husband, Jamie Marshall, which was phenomenal for us. And so she's on board right now, unless she gets busy or decides that she doesn't want to do it, for some reason, scheduling wise, whatever. But right now, they like this, they love this project, and they are part of it. uh, and so we're blessed in that regard. We
That's great.
also had, go ahead.
So, tell us about your creative process, Thomas. What is your general writing process, writing routine? How much time do you spend on research? And how many hours do you spend every day on your screenplay writing, crafting a screenplay, choosing right
That's a good
ideas
question.
which are marketable?
When I start a screenplay, that's my goal in life is I sit down in front of my computer and I have a notebook, I have the internet, and I write in Final Draft. I give them a plug. It's a great screenwriting software called Final Draft. It's the industry standard. And for those of you, there's other ones out there for you people that might see this, folks that might see this and wonder. Final Draft is the top of the line screenwriting software. So anyway, I always take my notebook and I hand write down my concept. What is this story going to be about? And what does this story have to offer? And I do two things. I write the concept down about the story that I want to tell, and then I also write what my beginning is going to be and what my ending is going to be. Okay? In the beginning of every screenplay, you basically have what's called you have a simple beginning where you set up the world to the viewer. You want to say who these characters are, what's the world they live in, and present that to people, to the viewer. And that's normally about 8 to 10 pages, something like that. And then after that beginning, that introduction, you have something generally that's called the inciting moment. And that exciting inciting, INCITING, inciting. And that inciting moment is what incites the story to a
Yeah.
different level. Something
Okay.
happens in that inciting level. In the case of Newton and Knuckles, it starts out with them being in a classroom,
Yeah.
sitting there watching the clock. It's the last day, and it's just minutes before 3 o'clock. And when the bell strikes three, they're released and they're out of school for the summer, for summer vacation. So that's when the story starts. It starts in that classroom a couple minutes before three, and we set up their world, who they are, and they have a confrontation right after school with these bullies, and you see the world, and you see that there are these archaeologists looking for stuff. Now the inciting moment comes when this old drunk named Scotty, the railroad crossing guard, says there's buried treasure in this town and no one's been clever enough to find it, and he's a whiskey drinking, guy. And so that's the catalyst, and that's called the inciting moment in any screenplay. And so that propels them to go look for the treasure. And so that's the inciting moment of the story. So what you want to do is you want to write. When I write the beginning, I write the end, and I write the inciting moment. And then once I have that, I fill in the characters. I already know kind of what the characters are because I base everything on life and people and things like that. So you want to write all your list of characters, and you have to know these characters. You have to be an expert on them. There's an old saying, and then if you don't, you have to do some research, which we'll talk about here in a second. There's an old saying that when you write a character in a screenplay, you should know what's in his junk drawer. Do you know what I mean? A junk drawer is like someone has a drawer either in their kitchen or their bedroom or somewhere where they throw all their junk in it,
Yeah. Got
from
it.
their life.
Yeah.
It has all kinds of life mementos and maybe concert tickets and things from you were a kid and old driver's licenses and report cards from school and all your life stuff. And they call it a junk drawer. So they always say you want to know
Okay.
what's in that character's junk drawer, meaning you know him inside and out, and you
Yeah.
know all his characteristics and his backstory, what makes him tick. You know his faults, you know his strong points, and that's what you have to research. You have to know each character, and a truly developed character comes across on screen, and that's the trick. So when you write, I write 8 hours a day and sometimes more. I've written 16 hours a day because when I write, you just keep going. Now, when I wrote Newton, I wrote it in 6 weeks, which is a
Okay.
really is a
Very
really
fast.
quick
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But I had an idea, I followed that process that I just gave you. I put in my notebook everything, handwritten, everything, and then I listed all my ideas that I could bring to this story, bringing the Thomas Edison elements over to the Coal Town story and the treasure. So I had to get this all lined up, and then I had to come up with the clues, the complex clues. That was the third part of difficulty, finding like, okay, what kind of clues are we going to offer here? It's something different. And even at the end, the treasure. I don't want a pot of gold. I want something different. I want this to be something very different. And I have two endings to the story. And we wanted this something to be of value, but not like a pirate's chest with gold. That's kind of overdone. I wanted a very original story. Even the Goonies, they find a pirate ship at the end and all the gold and the chests and stuff like that. I wanted something very different. Plus, I also this wasn't going to be $100 million movie. It was originally going to be a very low budget movie when I started. Doug Curtis, my mentor, pushed me and said, Tom, no. He said to me, this is too exciting. He said, write this for the screen, for the big screen, write it for Hollywood, write it for us. So I did. I went from here and I took it up to the Hollywood level, including the budget that it was going to cost to produce it. But it's still not $100 million film. We're looking at right now. I'm actually talking with some people right now. We're talking about $20 million, and we have some interests from various people. So it's going to be somewhere between $15 and $20 million, which it's a nice budget to work with when you have an indie, but it's not Hollywood money, So when you write, you also have to write with the budget in mind, and that's why I'm bringing this up, because if you are going to make it yourself as an indie film, you have to make it as efficient as possible, because every page is worth dollars, because everything that you write in there has to be shown on screen. And that's what, and a lot of times, beginning screenwriters don't understand that process. They just write a story. That's great. But a lot of times, to be a successful independent filmmaker, you have to understand the producing end of it and what it's going to cost. And can you really do this movie if you're going to do it on a low budget? Can you do it? And so you have to write in an efficient way that isn't going to cost a lot. Meaning not a lot of visual special effects. You don't want that. You want to write, something that's what you we call, what you see is what you get, where you write on location. So that's what goes into the screenplay, and it's all these elements that go in there, and that's how the process basically works. That's my basic process, and then a lot of research. If I don't understand something completely, I really go into it and learn background, history, and everything. And I did a lot of research for Newton and Knuckles, a tremendous amount of research, including into the life of Thomas Edison, really digging back in his life, even to his children.
Right. So
because his children.
You are a screenwriter, you are an editor, you are a director, you are a producer. So how do you balance creative freedom with practical production considerations, that it should be practically applicable when you are directing that movie, making that
It's a
movie?
really good question, really, and because that's what starting screenwriters or even independent, filmmakers need to understand. Um, Number one, it's called show business for a reason.
Right.
It might be a show, but it's a business.
Yeah.
And the first thing is, I mentioned earlier about everyone has a story, but is your story about Uncle Joe? Is it really compelling enough that somebody is going to buy a ticket
Right.
and go and see this movie?
Right.
And that's really important. You need to write a very compelling story, something that interests people. And you don't want to you want to make it so that it appeals to a wide variety of audience. In the film industry, there's something called quadrants. and the quadrants are basically age groups of people. Like I don't know the exact breakdown at the moment off the top of my head, but basically it's like teenagers and under, or maybe 10 and under, and then you have the teens and the young adults and then older people. And then they give it, is it a one quadrant, a two quadrant, a three or a four quadrant movie? The most successful movies, probably, other than some horror movies, are probably four quadrant movies that appeal to everybody. You can take your kids to see it. Your parents will enjoy it. The whole family will enjoy it. And that's a true four quadrant movie. And when I wrote Newton and Knuckles, I set out to make a truly four quadrant movie. So that gave me a larger audience to work with,
Okay.
to write it. And so you have to be cognizant of that. Even who is your audience? Is who wants to pay to see this story? Is it interesting? Is it compelling enough? So that's what you have to be careful about. And you have to say to yourself, is this commercial? Is this a commercial project? Because someone's going to tell you pretty quickly, whether you're the fruits of your work, whether they're good or they're bad. Is it truly show business? So that's the thing. You have to pick a subject that's commercial because that's the business side of it, and then to balance, you were saying about the creativity. Yes, you have to be creative as you can, and also work within the confines of the show business end of it. And are you writing something that's going to take a crazy amount of money? In other words, if you write something that only a big studio, like MGM, or somebody, a big Hollywood studio, are they the only ones that have the money and the wherewithal to make this script? Well, then you have to market that script to them, because that's your customer.
Yeah.
That's the people that are going to make this. So if you make something like that, you have to go to the studios, and that's it. So you have a limited, um, you have a limited amount of customers or clients that's going to take that script, so to speak. But if you write something that is a lower budget and something that appeals to everyone, you cover all your bases. You're covering your audience, and you're also then lowering the cost. So that's where it is a balance of creativity versus that. And how I do that is, knowing filmmaking. And that's where I said wearing all the hats earlier about knowing everyone's job. That's where it comes in, even as a screenwriter, because I am a filmmaker and who became a screenwriter. I know the aspects of filmmaking. I know what it would take to do this shot. I know what it would take to do this particular scene, and what it requires and how much would it cost, what would we need? So those are the things you have to know your needs, for a film. You have to know every aspect of it. You have to live it and breathe it and, become the film and think it, and you have to become all these characters. And then, that's the creativity, is you become all these characters. When you
Right.
write, you basically, it's like method acting. You become this character and you have to think, what are they going to say? Because writing and creativity, when you write, it comes to me as I write it. It comes to my head. I visualize it. I'm in the movie at the time when I'm writing, and I write these characters, and their dialogue comes natural to me. It's what this person is going to say and what this person is going to say. I know what I want the scene to be about. And then that's where I can't even explain it to you. It's just a process that it's just an innate.
I,
Um,
I, I can understand Thomas because I am a creative person, so myself, so I'm an author, so I can understand very well that what you're saying, and I found your profile super, super interesting because it's a kind of entrepreneurship. What you're doing is like you're wearing different hats, you're thinking from different perspectives, and then you are making a new baby, new movie, new project. So it's all like completely very, very interesting that you are as a producer, as a writer, as a director, as an editor. So wearing different hats and thinking from that perspective and coming of a commercial idea, which your investors buy, and most important, public buy that thing. So you have given your life to this independent filmmaking. So what do you think is the future of independent filmmaking?
Uh, I think independent filmmaking is actually pretty big right now. There was a time when the studios were pretty much what they say the only game in town, and you were at the whim and the mercy of the studios, and you had to get past those gatekeepers to get into the studios, to get your project in there, to see if they're interested in it. And it's very, very difficult. And that's why they call them the gatekeepers. But now filmmaking has been democratized because, back
Yeah,
when I mentioned I bought my first camcorder, I bought my first camera, and it cost me, it was a lot of money for me back then. It was like $600, and I thought, oh boy, but um, it was well worth it because I was able to take that out and film, and that's what I said earlier. You go film, go do it, go make something, go edit it, produce it. That's how you start. And so that gave me, the experience to do that. And I'm sorry, your more exacting question was again about
what do you think? What is the future of
yeah, the
independent
future of the
filmmaking?
independent, how that comes
And
in.
and the
It's
second part of this question is, you are a social media influencer. So how is social media helping this industry?
okay. That's another very good question. It comes in that networking process. Um, I think as filmmaking got democratized by coming down in price to where now I have a setup here that I'm sitting in front of. You can't see, but I'm at my editing bay right now, where I
Okay.
have I have a very high power horsepower computer and my monitors and sound system, and I can basically do small Hollywood effects here right here in my own home.
Right, right. You are very
The
right.
cost before,
Yeah,
it could
yeah.
have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this, and now you can do it right here at home,
Wow.
certain things. So that's one way that it that the cost coming down really helped independent filmmaking. And when I say it democratized it, now you no longer have to be at the mercy of the studios. And
Right.
I tell people, go make something. I don't care. You're not going to sell your first thing. Go do something. Go make something and edit it and learn it, because that's going to teach you. And then from there, that's where you make your way up. Once you have something in the can, as they say, the old film can, um, then you move your way up and learn your strong points, your weak points, and what you need to learn. And it all comes together at some point. And independent filmmaking, because right now there's a distributor that I met at one of the film markets, when I was over at the Cannes Film Festival and Film Market a year ago. One of the distributors that I was talking to, he said to me, um, content is king, is an old saying. Um, and his actual saying was, if content is king, distribution is God. Because you can make anything, but if you don't have a
Yeah,
distributor, it's
right.
going to sit on your editing desk collecting
Yeah,
dust. Um, but content is king now because there's so many outlets that there wasn't before.
yes,
Before it was the big screen and maybe a made for TV movie. And
right.
then when VHS came out, some of the independent movies came directly to VHS and
Yeah,
Betamax and all those old um, formats when it first came out, home video. And
yeah,
that's where Doug Curtis, my mentor, started. His first movie was a direct to VHS release. It was, I don't remember what it was called, Sorority. I think it was called Sorority Massacre, I believe was the name of it. It was a horror movie. And he made it for a substantial amount of money back then. It was like 600,000. And now it was a truly independent film. So he was on the wave of that, and he understood that, and he also worked for studios. So there's a lot of outlets that are out there now that didn't exist before. It was either movie theater or it was VHS. Now, holy, you have a streaming, even YouTube, which really democratized. And we're talking, um, you have all these streamers, what, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, uh, Tubi. I don't even know them all, but all those people need content. And
Yes.
that's where I say content is king,
Content is king.
but as this gentleman said, if content is king, distribution is God. Now you need to get a distributor to take what you made and sell it and market
Yeah.
it. That's the business side of things.
Yes.
So independent film is growing, um, and it will grow until the market says no more. Um, but also, there's a good side of independent filmmaking, and there's a bad side. And um, most people, when they start in filmmaking, in independent filmmaking, they always want to make a horror movie. That is the most popular genre that there
Okay.
is horror movies. And there's so many low budget, terrible horror movies out there and
Okay.
that people make, and they never go anywhere. That's okay if it's a learning process, but I know many people that decided they're going to make a horror movie and they're going to sell it. Well, you might sell it at like some of these horror conventions or something. If you set up a table, you can have some people buying your movie, from your little convention table or something, and they do that. But when I talk to distributors and sales agents, when they talk about horror movies, it's a glut. There's too much of it out there, and they tell me that if you're a beginner and you're an independent filmmaker and your film is going to be a horror movie, the first one you make, he said, make it for $0.
Okay.
He said, because that's what you may get in return, $0.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's my advice to filmmakers. Think about if you're going to go out there, everyone says, oh, I'm going to make this horror movie. And these horror movies they're all in the dustbin of history. you know, they're out there littered, And so I think, so with that in mind, independent film has to prove itself. They have to prove, and it has with certain people, that you can make high quality productions that people really want to see and really want to pay for. It's the type of material that people will clamor to see, or you have an audience, that the production values are really good, because that's everything, all your production values. And I think that the good independent films are always going to find a market. And that means, and it doesn't mean that you have to have the top Hollywood A-list actors in it, although it helps. And in my case, it's really going to help our picture. We can talk about this then if we have time. But you need to make a film that's really, it looks good and it sounds good. And the trick is this: it's what me and Doug set out to do. Our more or less our mission statement was, we want to produce movies on a very low budget that look and perform like they cost many times the amount of the
Right.
actual production budget. In
Right.
other words, if we took a film and we paid $3 million to make this film, we wanted that $3 million film to look like a character-driven Hollywood movie. That's your
Okay.
goal,
That's
to
great.
make your production look and perform like another level.
Right.
That's the secret that's going to propel independent filmmaking further, or it'll revert back to the studios, meaning the customers won't buy. And that's the business side of things. You know what I mean? There's always going to be YouTubes and Vimeos and things where you can put anything you want on there. But if we're talking about the business side of independent film, because independent films go to theater
Right.
and they go to Netflix and they
Right.
go to Amazon and they go to
Right.
Hulu and these, the other streamers. That is the important thing, that you want to make a picture that will compete with the top pictures. Now, maybe not
Right.
$100 million. We're not talking about these Marvel comic, um, you know,
Yeah, that's
uh,
different thing. Yeah,
remakes and things like
Avengers
that.
and all the things. Yeah.
And this brings up another important point, is that Hollywood is a little bit anal retentive, meaning that when they latch onto a good thing, they stick with the good thing. And that's
Yes.
why they have movies. The studio productions have what's called a tent pole movie. And that movie will hit big and make them billions of dollars. Then anything else under the 10, if it's a failure, they don't care. Because when they hit with that tent pole movie, it becomes a sequel. And as they
Yeah,
call it,
it's
they
a
milk
kind of,
that
it's a
movie.
franchise. Then it's a franchise
It's a
business.
franchise.
Yeah.
Now, independent movies, you're competing against that. But where you have the edges is the content. People are getting tired, and I am. I
Right.
won't see these Marvel comic. It doesn't appeal to me. How
Yeah.
many explosions and superheroes can you see? I want a good story. I want to see a world created in front of me that I haven't seen before. I want to see good characters. I want to feel those characters, the bad guys, the good guys, the heroes, the good moments. I want to feel that, and be immersed in that. I don't want to be immersed in explosions and superheroes flying and snatching people. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's what Hollywood has to offer mostly. Is these that's their tentpole
Right.
films. Is these super comic book type stuff. And where the independent film comes in is you have the ability now to give people the content that they want to see, that I want to see, that you want to see, that your family wants to see. And that's where the independent film is going to be strong, because you can fill that part of the business. And that's what's important, that we're
Mm.
filling that part of the business of what Hollywood is not making. Okay. We're not trying to be Hollywood. You
Yeah.
want to be on that level that I explained, making a picture look like it cost, or someone in Hollywood produced it, but it's not. It's an indie. So that is the future of independent film, is filling that void where Hollywood is not filling.
I think
And
Thomas, you said that content is king. So I can add one word: quality content is king. So people are still people are hungry for quality content. So if you are having
quality
quality
content, yes,
content, they will not care about whether you are in $100 million budget or $5 million budget. They are just
exactly. They
hungry
want a
for
good story.
quality content. That is the thing. It was simply amazing that I learned so much from you in this podcast, and I think that many youngsters, especially people who are interested in making films or YouTube blogs or whatever, like people who are interested in such kind of stuff, it's a very great learning from this podcast. They can learn a lot. It's like a master class. One last question,
Well,
Thomas.
I hope they do take something from it. I mean, that's kind
Yeah,
of the crib notes version of what I have to say. I know I'm long,
it's
and
simply
you've
that you have shared your,
summarized everything beautifully
yeah,
and succinctly from
yeah,
what I'm saying, and I see that you get what I was saying. I'm glad.
right. Yeah, and you just shared all your experiences and everything so well that I think people will find it very interesting and they will learn from this podcast. It's not just an entertainment; it's a great master class. Uh, One last question, Thomas. How
Sure,
you keeps yourself motivated after so many years and spending in this career?
that's a really good question. I ask myself that sometimes too. In truth, there are times when I'm not as motivated as I want to be because I've been in it a long time. But I'm still not where I want to be. I've had many things broadcast on television, um, and streaming platforms and pay-per-view and hotels and things like that, the programming that I've helped produce. I've never had anything on the big screen myself. That's me with my name that I wrote and I produced. And that is my holy grail. And that's what keeps me going. And that's our hopes for Newton and Knuckles, that I go from television and, being published to the big screen. That's where I want to be. I feel like that's when I will say, maybe I have arrived. But until that, that's what keeps me motivated. And it keeps me motivated is, sometimes I have to take a step back and take some time off and get away from it to get refreshed. But I find that when I do step back, I come back motivated and sometimes stronger than before, and and willing to push. And I go back to what Doug Curtis told me, that you have to be willing to die for this industry. Now I know that's a large that's a large ask, but his whole point is that you really have to give it your all.
You have to burn all your
Put it on
boats.
the line.
Yeah,
It's like a football player, or
right.
at a World Cup match, and he's laying on the ground, can't move from exhaustion. That's kind of who you have to be. You really have to put that into it and make a plan and go out and network. And my talk, if anything, was like starting and building your way up. How I did it. And it's not necessarily the easiest route, but you're going to find it's the route that you have to take nowadays, unless you are going to be an intern and you go to a studio and you get a job there. And and that's rare. Most people are going to start how I started, with nothing, and you have to get together with others. So the motivation is either there or it's not. You have to love it, and I love it. I started writing my first book. Well, my first book that I wrote, how I got involved in screenwriting, was when I was 12, actually. And I wrote and produced a play when I
Okay.
was 10 years old. And that's part of the story. When I was featured by the Heisner magazines, I won an award from the Heisner people. They give an award for people that stick to it and are like journeymen, and I'm
Okay.
like a journeyman, and I'm
Okay.
still wanting to get on the big screen. And I know everything I've done is like a dress rehearsal for this moment to get my picture
Yeah.
on the big screen. And when I got the Heisner Award, it occurred to me that this was a long journey, and for people that stick to it. And that's what you have to do. You have to kind of set your journey and stick to it and stay motivated, and you have to love it. So when I was 10 years old, I made my first play. I bet a girl, her name was Melanie. I remember this quite well. It was a George Washington Day play,
Okay.
and I don't know how I got involved. I was writing, and I decided that I was going to put on this play. And the smartest girl in my class, named Melanie, said, "You can't do this." She said, "You will not succeed at doing this." And I said, "Oh, yes, I will." Just out of pure arrogance, I guess. And she said, "I'll bet you 10 cents."
Oh,
I guess a lot of money
so it
back
was
then.
it was a
When
challenge.
you were in the we were in the fifth grade.
Okay.
Okay, we were in the fifth
Yeah.
grade, and so she bet me 10 cents, and I just, like, at 10 years old, somehow took myself to a different level and got some people that said, "Yeah, I'll help you with this." And we put together this George Washington play, and I saw it performed in front of our school, multiple classes. And it actually came to fruition. We made our own props and we made our own little skits and things. And all I remember is, after the play was over, this person walked silently by me and dropped 10 cents on my desk. I won.
Yeah.
I won the
You
10
want that
cents,
time. Yeah.
and that taught me at 10 years old what
Yeah.
it takes to perform and to do this. Because I did my first play at 10 years old, and that taught me. So I
Yeah.
had that to draw on all my life. And I always remember that 10 cents. And I told that story in the Heisner magazine article about me in the interview. I said, that's what compelled me. Winning that 10 cents, it was like $10 million to me because it meant something, because I
Yeah,
actually pulled it off and I had never done it before. And I pulled it off and I'm proud of that. Yeah.
that's great,
So,
Thomas. Thank you so much for sharing all
sure.
your life stories. So interesting, and it was a great learning. And I
Okay.
wish you all the best. I want to see your name on the big screen.
Well, thank
Yes,
you. I appreciate the
thank you.
opportunity,
Yeah,
yeah, and hopefully everybody will learn about Newton and Knuckles, and hopefully by the time this, we'll have some more news by the time this goes to podcast for you. So it was
yeah, yeah,
nice meeting you.
definitely. Yeah, it
Stay in
was.
touch, and
Yeah, it was really nice one. Yeah, we stay in touch and wish you all the best for all your
thank thank
future
thank you so
projects and
much.
everything. Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right.
Thomas. Thank you.
Hey, take care now. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye. That was Thomas Koveleskie, filmmaker, writer, and partner at Quarterton Films, sharing insight into his journey, his craft, and his passion for storytelling. From military broadcasting to social media influence, and now producing thought provoking films, Thomas continues to push creative boundaries and champion original content in today's media landscape. Be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming projects. You won't want to miss what's coming next.